Welcome to More Than Work, the podcast reminding you that your self-worth is defined by more than your job title. I'm Rabia, an IT project manager, comedian, nonprofit volunteer, and sometimes activist. Every week, I'll chat with a guest about pursuing passions outside of work or creating meaningful opportunities inside the workplace. As you listen, I hope you'll be inspired to do the same. Welcome back this week, everyone. I'm really excited about my guest. I usually am, but this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is Mexican food and music, or so two of my favorite things, actually. So I have Miguel Banuelos, owner of Salsa Pistolero in New York City. So Miguel, welcome to the More Than Work.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and do you just want to tell people a little bit about who you are, and then we'll get into things?
Sure. My name is Miguel Banuelos. I'm originally from Texas, San Antonio to be exact, and moved to New York City about I guess it's just past 19 years now, coming on my 20th year. And I came here originally to do music industry, did that for about 8 to 10 years, switched over to mobile, digital, creative, et cetera, and after a while, kind of got sick of that and figured out that there was something that I had to offer New Yorkers that other people didn't, and that was Mexican food. Launched that about 5 years ago. It's not been easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm still here. I'm still alive, and so that counts for something.
Yeah, no, it definitely. Well, this year it does for sure, right? Yeah, and I mean, we first met when you were in the app space. I was a product manager for a mobile app, and I think we were just talking to you about marketing, probably. But yeah, now you have Salsa Pistolero, so maybe let's just jump into that first and just talk about that. So your company has some cool marketing, but first, why don't you just maybe tell our listeners how you went from all those things into the food space and into your company?
For me, it was very much, like I said, I'd kind of gotten sick of the world that I kind of put myself in. So I'm not going to act like I didn't choose to do that and that I couldn't do it. I had been, the way that I kind of put my foot into the music world was via digital, online, all that stuff. I was very early into that world. I'd been doing web design in college for work. So that's, I've been doing that. I think like in 99, I was doing web design for literally anything from rock bands in DC to seafood restaurants in Arizona. It was just the beginning of that world. I started with a startup around the same time with the same guy who ran the web design company. So again, this is 99, 2000, I was in the startup world already. So I used that to get into the music space, and then flipped it and went back to more digital, using music as a plank of the things that I was offering, right? So after doing that, I got deeper and deeper into the digital world. So it was app design and app kind of management, all the way to mobile advertising and agencies and gaming and production and product management, project management, a little bit of everything. And again, it wasn't that I was ever against that, but after a while, it kind of weighed on me a little bit more. And I was like, I don't want to do this right now. I'm kind of done with it. And I tried to be, as responsible as I could. And I was working at a consulting firm, consulting for them, doing big projects like AIG level stuff and Kaiser Permanente and huge things like that, which were really definitely interesting. Like, I got to go to Japan to do a hackathon to knock out 5 apps prototypes overnight, dealing with an India side of production and a San Francisco design and the team in Tokyo. And so, that was great and super interesting. But again, I knew I kind of wanted to go. And so I forced myself. I said, I'm giving myself another year. And at the end of that year, hopefully I have, things, at least a bank account that will handle a little while of no income. So I did that. I just kind of gave myself a date, and even they on their side, not to speak ill of anyone, but a lot of what they kind of were doing in terms of their business model was much more about headcount than it was about
Mm-hmm.
producing great work. Not that the work was bad, but it was they were more worried about losing headcount, people sitting in the shop to be able to charge, than they were about losing me for the project. And I was like, you know what, I understand that, that's fine, but I if I just stay here for the money, I'm going to keep staying here for the money, and I need to, kind of set
Yeah.
myself a goal. So I did that, and then I thought during that time period, what am I going to do otherwise? And one of the main things that was the driver for me to do the Mexican food stuff, I guess, were two. One, there were so many things that I wanted Mexican food wise that I was used to
Mm-hmm.
from both San Antonio, southern Texas, but also from northern Mexico, which is where my family's all from, because New York doesn't really have that. Like, we have plenty of people from Oaxaca and from Puebla, but that food is
Mm-hmm.
completely different. That's, I always tell people, it's like, imagine if someone told you that Chicago style pizza is the only kind of American food there is. Like, it's a giant
Yeah.
country with all these different things. And so when people say, "Oh no, there's tons of Mexicans in New York," I'm like, "Yeah, they are, but they're mostly from Puebla or Mexico City, and that's just not what I am looking for, or what I wanted." And not to
Mm-hmm.
diss anything from that stuff, but it's not my thing. So the second thing that I leaned on, or as an idea for my push to do that, was I wanted to, like I said before, that job that I was doing last was very much about headcount rather than about me. And not in a pompous way, but more in a, I've been around the block a few times and I know some things,
Mm-hmm.
and I've worked at all these agencies that would bring in experts to do X, Y, and Z, whatever that was. And I thought, there are things that I know, that I've experienced, that I've been through, that I've learned, be it from the cooking side, the travel side, the business side, that other people don't know how to do. So maybe it's time for me to, maximize the skills that I have that no one else has. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not that I'm better than anyone, but I thought, I'm kind of a unique property in New York City in the things that I know and do. And therefore, there are probably a lot of people who need those skills or need that, consulting or recommendations or whatever it is. Uh, and I should be able to exploit that. If I'm going to be exploited, I might as well exploit myself, kind of thing. And so I kind of focused on that and thought, it's so much. I always tell people, after I made that decision, it was so much easier to get up at 6 in the morning, to be in the kitchen at 6:30, to do something that I like doing, that
Mm-hmm.
was exactly the kind of thing that only I could deliver, than it was to be on a conference call, to be on with China, to talk about stuff that really didn't matter to me in any way. So that kind of gave me a reason, or it reinforced the reasoning behind the idea of, like, what, I need to focus on the things that I can do, because there are plenty of things that I can do. And much to the point of what we're talking about, a lot of times what I've found, and this is the thing that I've pushed, that's been the most uphill push for me, is other people's lack of imagination
Mm-hmm.
about what I can help them with. So that's everything. Like, if you look at my LinkedIn or my resume or talk to me, it's easy to pull one thing out and be like, oh, Miguel does Mexican salsa. That's what he knows. That's what
Right.
he delivers. And that is true. But, I try to expand people's understanding of that, or understanding of what I'm offering, and saying, well, that's true. I can also cater an event for you, or I can create a playlist for you, or I can help you with, finding tastemakers that fit your brand, or doing translations for your website if you're trying to, garner more attention from Latinx millennials versus just a translation that you would get from putting your website through Google Translate. Uh, so that kind of thing, while it's a little esoteric and a little bit hard,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit squishy, kind of hard to get your head around, I found that if you as a person looking to hire someone, if you have some imagination, you might be able to get a lot of interesting things from me that other people won't be able to get you. Like the fact that I ran mobile advertising platform for Ericsson is just as interesting as running all of the new media for V2 Records for 2 years. So like that, those two things are not separate. and they're not the same, but they're part of this package that somehow, informs things.
Yeah, and I think what I like about all of that at this point is you identifying your own value and being able to articulate it. Because I think what happens, and I can speak from my personal experience, having been at some places for 8 years, for example. Well, only one place for 8 years, because otherwise, if I say several, I'm like older than I am. But you know, but I think I started to definitely lose who I was and what value I had. I thought, well, now I'm only capable of doing X, Y, and Z at this specific place, rather than you know infinite things at any place. And I think that's what a lot of people end up encountering after a while, especially when they're going to try to make a career or job change. It just, there's this whole barrier of getting past how you think others see you versus what's true.
Well,
So,
there's that, and the thing that I found as well, especially working in music industry, and like when I went to Ericsson in the first place, I was told like the reason we're hiring you is because you can go out to concerts 3 or 4 times a week and stay out till God knows what hour, but you can still show up for a 9 a.m. meeting and be totally, ready to go and present to C-level people that only work on mobile and have no idea about music. Like that's why we're hiring you. And while that's great, I love that that's why I was getting paid. At the same time, I was like, so you want me to be able to do all the stuff on the side, and that's why you're bringing me in, but you're not really paying me to do that, right? Like I do that on my own time, and you want me to be that kind of full, interesting, real well-rounded person, but that's not what's on the payroll. And so I
hmm,
kind of got to the point where I was like, if I'm doing that, I should get paid for that, right? That's part of the package that you're actually getting with me. Whether or not you, I mean, if I got a job, just developing web pages, if I could still do that, that's a different job, and that's fine. But you are getting paid for that specific thing. And so I found that was again a catalyst for moving. I was like, well, if I'm going to do all this stuff to make myself more interesting and better, well-rounded in terms of creative and culture and all this stuff, then I should get paid for all of that, not just part of it.
that is true. And again, it's just knowing like your value across the board, not just in that one area. I like that a lot. So
But and also
I'm sure.
doing it's empowering what you want to do, right? Like I didn't want to
Hmm.
do what I wanted to do. I hate the idea of doing what I want to do after hours.
Yeah,
Like I got tired of
that's
that. Like
true.
that's not. I don't. While on the one hand, I will give people props. My girlfriend is great at that. Like she absolutely 100% believes at 5:30 it's over. She's done. She's not working after
Mm.
that, and she does everything she wants on other hours, and it's fine. And it gives her a good, rigid kind of schedule for her life. And she's not the kind of person that opens her emails up on Saturday and responds to people. It's like, nope, it's not happening. That's great. I'm not like that. And I will work 24 hours a day if you're sending me emails. Again, especially working in the digital world, like I was getting questions from Sweden at, you know,
Yeah.
3 in the morning. I was getting questions from India. Like there was no, I tried to explain to people early on when I started working with them with those kinds of offshore teams or whatever, like, look, here's the way I run things as a product or project manager or whatever. I would always say, the thing that I'm going to do for you is at the end of my day, I'm going to ask every single question in an email that I need answered. If you can go to your email in the morning, see those questions, and answer them for me, and have any questions ready for me by the end of your day, we're set. Nothing will be delayed. It'll be great. We'll be totally on time. If you don't do that one day, we're basically losing a day's worth of work every time you don't
Mm.
do that. And that was mainly for the workflow of, global workplace, but
Hmm.
also just to keep everyone sane. I didn't want them to have to answer emails at 11 p.m. Like it's
Right.
part of the respect of that space that you have to do that. And it's just too hard to get people that way. Like again, it's not even like people are begging you to do it, but it's just human nature for a lot of people. If an
Hmm.
email comes through at 10 p.m. and I'm checking my email and I know that I just need to answer yes or no, I probably will. That's not good if I'm not getting paid for that.
Right. And that's great boundary setting because I've read a couple articles and about just how even if you as a manager, and it doesn't mean manager of people, but manager of project, whatever, if you send emails at crazy times because you're working those crazy times, and they could be crazy because you want to work at midnight or you feel like you have to, or because you're in a different time zone than someone else. But when you send something, even if you say, don't look at this until morning, or this isn't until Monday, it doesn't matter because they're immediately like having that cognitive response of, oh, I have an email, I have to read it, I have to answer it. And even if you say they don't, it doesn't really matter because it's been kind of set off. And so people do things like set timers, but I like that as a workflow too. And I mean, I'm a project manager during the day, and I'm kind of doing the thing right now where I'm doing a lot of my fun or like really passion stuff at night, like podcasting, volunteering, and comedy, right? And then I'm working a full-time day job. So I completely relate with what you said. But there's also that thing of, yeah, I'll see emails come in and feel like I need to answer them or vice versa. And it's a really hard thing to do. So that as a workflow was really smart. And it was like a kind thing to do for everyone too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it really, the other thing is one of the reasons I do that, and I've asked people to do that kind of thing, is just ask the questions at the end of the day, is it's just as much kind of workflow, global time frame. Again, you don't want to lose a full day because somebody didn't answer something you needed, but it's also to combat that reactive email response thing because, because I've learned to do this myself just in life now. There are emails that I will get that are work related or whatever, even personal, whatever, that I'll see and I'll be like, I can answer this right now. But if I think about it for 15 minutes or half an hour, or maybe even 3 hours later, something might change in the conversation. Either they got something wrong and they want to change their mind, or I had something pop up and, I have to change it. I'll even give you a really good example. For this call, I had chosen the time just like like we decided on the calendar app, and everything was fine. And then I got an email yesterday, like last night, late, like at 11, like, oh, you have a call to be on from 2 to 4 now. And I was like, okay, so what can I do here? I actually sent an email to another person on that call. I said, this looks like a similar call to last week's call. Is this the same call? Do I need to be on again? And they were like, I don't know. They might cover new things. You might need to be on. And I thought, okay, so what do I do? Do I change the reservation time that I had for this, or do I wait it out? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to wait this out because anything could change right now. I've got a long time. I will RSVP for the other call and say I'll be there, but things could change. And of course, I log on to the call at 2, and it's the same exact call as I had last Monday. So I didn't have to do it. And I was like, you know what? If I just responded quickly and reacted and said, oh, I got to change that time because I've got another booking. Like, there's something to be said, especially in this world of reactive kind of reservations of times, to just kind of wait it out a little bit. Like there was enough of a window that anything could change at any moment, and it would just exacerbate everything if I didn't wait just a few hours. And so like that's the thing is I think that the functional style of email makes it so you want to get it out, respond, get it done. And that's not always the best policy. And if you wait, usually, and again, if it's not like there wasn't going to be a difference for you for our time for me to tell you either way, right? And unless I had to tell you and reschedule or something, and I knew it was like a bad thing, then I would have had to done that, and I would deal with the consequences of that. But there was always a good chance it wasn't going to happen that way. So I feel like that's one of the things that I try to explain to people, especially with business stuff or development or project stuff is, if I have something to answer at 9, it might be different by 11. And those 2 hours aren't going to kill anybody. And in fact, there's a much better chance that by 10:30, I'll get an email saying, oh, you know what? Forget about that. That changed. Yeah. Somebody responded to something and now it's different. So I feel like that was also another reason for that world. But if you wait till the end of the day, then in theory, because people. But in theory, that should be the end of your day. Nothing is going to change for you after that point. So you should have
Mm-hmm.
all the real questions you need. And and that allows you to shut off. Like, I'm not expecting an answer till the next morning. That's fine. Don't
Yeah.
respond. It's good. Just wait until your end of the day. And then when India's end of the day comes, by the time I check my email, oh, okay, there's the new email. Now we've got the ball rolling. And it kind of keeps everyone honest as well.
No, so I really like that. And I even just talking to friends, I mean, about how their workday goes. Sometimes you'll chat with them during their workday. And I have one friend who just said he got an email and then right after got a Slack telling him that he got an email, and
Exactly.
he's just like, that's fine. You know, there was no urgency. There's no reason to send the double communication, but it's stuff like that that just drives people nuts. So it's good to find good ways of communicating.
Well, and it's also just rules, right? It's simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of thing that, and again, I don't mean it in, like you said, like management terms, but
Mm-hmm.
if you get people that rule, then you can also kind of use that rule against them, not in a bad way, but in a basic rule setting way of like, well, I'm sorry, you didn't ask me that question at the end of the day, and I could have gotten it for you in time, but you didn't. And I have 17 other questions that were asked to me that were on time. And that will
Mm-hmm.
push you to the end of that line, or the day is gone. Like I can't, like a lot of this would happen. Like, I can't get back to India now because China didn't ask me the question when they were done with their day. So now
Yeah.
India is not going to be there now because it's just, it's 10 o'clock, it's 10 a.m. my time. They're gone. Their day is done. There's no way for me to get that day back. And so you kind of use that. And a lot of times it's not lip service, but it's kind of client control. A lot of times you're
Yeah.
like, look, this is how business works. You have your designers asked me this question. That was fine. I sent it to my designers. They're working on it. That they sent it to the developers. They're working on it. You're trying to stop the train now when I gave you kind of specific guidelines about these kind of deliveries. It's not like I'm just being mean. It's a train.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that are, in front of me and things that are in back of me, and that's how these things work. So you can kind of use it both as a punishment as well, but it's much more just it's setting guidelines, setting those bumpers for
Yeah.
work. Period.
And I guess before we move off this subject and get into the food
Hmm.
part of the chat, one thing I noticed changing, and I'm not working very much with teams in India right now, but one thing I noticed changing when I was at a company in Dallas for a little while, there's a power dynamic shift I've noticed where, say 15 years ago, right, when I was at an American company and we had outsourcing in India, you could kind of say, well, work 24 hours a day over there. And I'm not saying I liked that because I didn't. I don't like treating people like they're not people.
Right.
But I did have a manager who was like, well, they can work any hours and they can extend their day. And it was like, well, they have families and stuff. They being
Mm-hmm.
people have families, they get hungry, whatever. And I noticed maybe 5 years later, and probably even more now, it's like, no, people are working their work days. So this is the work day in India. That's when the people are working. This is the work day in Asia. This is the work day in America. Now I'm in England, and they definitely work shorter hours in
Well,
you can
that's
both.
another thing. Is like and it's good. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think a lot of people assumed otherwise, but the culture differences with the way that
Mm-hmm.
people work, and I'm not making value judgments on it, but the way that people work has to be dealt with, right? Like that's another
Mm-hmm.
plank. Like I've explained to people, if you as a company decide to offshore, development or design or whatever it is, uh, you can't assume that it's done the same way there as it is here. And I don't mean anything
Mm-hmm.
from like the look and feel of it or the quality, but more like a good example when I was working at Ericsson, they decided to offshore a bunch of their development back office stuff to Brazil because their thinking was, well, it's closer in time zone compared to some of the other places we work on. It's only like 1 hour ahead or whatever. Um, and they've been wanting to expand in Ericsson in Brazil for a while anyway, so we'll do that. I'm like, okay, cool. And one of the interesting things we realized, and again, this is not a value judgment, but they have 1,000 holidays in Brazil.
Yeah.
Like, oh
So we
my.
work with Argentina.
Yes, exactly.
So actually, well, not work with, but I mean, it's our team is
Mhm.
Argentina, US, and a couple other places, right?
Right.
So yeah, I know because we get
Yeah,
jealous.
absolutely. Like, oh, sorry, we've got the Saints Day today. We can't work. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm like, 3 days later, oh, yep, got another day off. Sorry. And then Friday, we're taking
Hmm.
off early. We're just having a big cookout. That's what we do. And so it was like, you couldn't say anything about it because that's their country. Like, they're literally just taking their federal holidays. But it's those kind of things where, again, if you don't set those rules and guidelines and boundaries for your own mental sake, as well as just for, a basic internal flow, then really all bets are off because they may not be working for the next 3 days, and it's just because it's the summer midweek break week that week, and so it just happens, and it happened last week, and it happens next week, and
Yeah.
you're tied to that. But there's a basic level of it. Whereas, like I said, it seems very stringent. It's much more kind of fair and again
Yeah.
helpful rather than difficult.
No, yeah, and it's really cool getting to work. I mean, I'd say, you know, usually 60 to 70% of the teams I have on projects will be from Argentina or from over here, just especially on my projects now. And I think it's cool because I get the chance to usually learn about another culture. I get to actually learn how to work more efficiently too because I'm constrained to, working within these times and then they're in these other times. And I don't know, it's kind of fun, but I did notice a shift in like the US determining when everyone worked at some point. And that was that it was kind of I don't know, it was kind of fascinating really.
And
Just
sometimes
after
I've like even leaned on people to push back to us. Like we had a
mm-hmm.
team in when I was doing that last consulting job. Our development team was in Bulgaria, I think, somewhere like that,
Mm.
and they were like all super service type spot, and they were really great at what they did, and they could add or subtract people as need be. They were big enough to have that kind of workforce. And they were always ready. They were like, oh, if you need more people, we'll get them off. We need people overnight. I'm like, no, don't say that. Like, whether or not I could afford it, whether or not we want to, like, no, I don't want anybody. This dumb site does not require you to be up till 4 in the morning. Like, it's not a big deal. But they all wanted to do that. And I was like, no, 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 that's not cool. Like, I don't need that. You don't need that. That's too far.
Yeah, it is. It is. All right, let's get to what you're doing now. So, I guess first, I mean, I read a lot of what you've written on Medium. I like your voice there for sure.
Thanks.
I like what you're doing.
It's a
Yeah, because
little
I mean,
controversial. It's a little
I
pointed.
like, yeah, yeah, no, and that's what I like. I mean, I could talk about actually a lot of it, but I think just even like there's not real Mexican food here or whatever that kind of statement. I mean, I'm in London, not the mecca of Mexican food for sure. Although I did find two restaurants I want to give a shout to. So there's one called Mestizo, and they have a market next door. So
Nice.
if you are ever over here, it's in Camden. It's really it's cool. And I bought tamales that I brought home. They're frozen. I had them last night, actually some, and it's amazing. And so I was really happy that. And then there's one called Corazon. So they're great. But overall, yes, I've been someone who said that when I lived in New York.
Hmm.
And so two things. One, just briefly what you think about someone saying that, right? But then two, I want to know about your salsa and kind of your cooking and what you're doing.
So the reason I started it, like I said, was because I couldn't get what I wanted, right? And that's why it was funny because after having worked and lived here for so many years, I had found people and places and Mexican stuff that I needed, that I could make do with what
Mm-hmm.
I wanted. Um, and by by correlation, also when I started doing this, I started working in kitchens more, obviously, and so I started, interacting with more Mexicans because every single restaurant in New York City, I don't care what kind of food it is being
Mm-hmm.
cooked by Mexicans, unless it's a Chinese place, in which case it's probably Chinese, as well as Vietnamese and Korean. They're all Chinese in the kitchen. That's just how it is. It's just a fact of life in New York City. So,
Yeah.
uh, with that kind of idea, dealing with learning all these people were here, uh, what I saw was at one point, yes, people are right. If you want, if you're from Southern California or from Texas or even from anywhere in the South, really, and you come to New York, there is no Mexican food here comparatively. Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
that's just a fact. But New York is enormous, right? And there are just a billion people here, whatever. It's just so big. And so what you have to do is put in the legwork, right? You've got to find those places. You've got to, I forced it upon myself. It's like, okay, I'm going to go pound the pavement. I'm going to go walk up to, or I'm going to take subway up to 116th Street and walk the
Mm-hmm.
6 avenues from east to west to find out what there is. And it's all Mexican everything. I'm going to go to Corona, Queens. I'm going to go to, the food fairs out there. I'm going to go to the Red Hook ball fields where they have all of the
Mm-hmm.
carts. They're all Mexican, right? So they're out there. They're there. They have lives. They have families. They have the things that they've built to support those people. Again, they may work at 11 Madison Park or at the Shake Shack or wherever, but they still have their own needs when it comes closer to home, right? So the idea
Mm-hmm.
that there's no Mexican food is at once totally true and absolutely not true. But the weird thing for me, or the reason that the raison d'etre of everything for my move to the food stuff was, again, but it wasn't mine. It wasn't what I wanted. And it wasn't like I was totally cool with, the mole from Puebla, but that's not where I'm from. So I was
Mm-hmm.
never a huge mole guy. Not that I dislike it, it's just not at the top of my list. Um, People here do a lot of barbacoa, but they do lamb barbacoa, which is a southern thing. My family's all from the north, and in the north we do cow. So there's beef rules everything, right? And so I noticed these differences, and I was like, you know, while there's plenty of Mexican here, there's not plenty of what I want. And so maybe I can, uh, I guess the way I always explain it is there was as much food, um, just the actual thing, the actual, offering of food to people that was specific, but also the education of the fact that they're not the same thing. Food
Mm-hmm.
from Mexico in the north is not the same as the Yucatan. It's not the same as the West Coast. It's not the same as Mexico City. Is not the same as the interior. All of those things, they're regions, right? I
Mm-hmm.
always compare it either to the U.S. if people understand that better. But if you're more of a food person, it's like Italy. I think Italy and Mexico have totally the same thing. Like they're a bunch of different states that have all these different natural resources and natural, environments and terroirs, and those things inform the local food more than anything else. Sure, there's tradition. Sure, there's a long background, but it really comes down to basic things that have happened in that area that have changed the way that food is made in that area. And those areas are more important than the overall thing, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't compare Northern Italian food to Sicilian food. They're just so totally different. Like you've got stuff from the Alps, it's basically Austria, and you've got so many delicious cheeses and butter and potatoes and all these wonderful things that would never ever happen in Sicily because it's all fish, and it's
Mm-hmm.
red sauce, and it's all these things are so different. And so a lot of the thinking I had was, what, I want to do my food because I want my food, but it's also a launching pad to explain to people these differences, and even kind of more, not just regional differences, but um, kind of ethical differences, or maybe not ethical, but um, kind of ways of life. Like one of the things I always
Mm-hmm.
tell people is the reason I started making salsa was because one, I couldn't find good salsa, but two, I don't think people understand what salsa is supposed to be. I always tell people if you buy a jar of salsa and the onions are kind of blue and you have it in your pantry for 3 or 4 weeks before you open it, that's not salsa. That's not good. That's a bad thing. No one in Mexico ever eats salsa like that. That just doesn't exist. And the reason is because you make it. You make it right before you eat. You make it for the beginning of the week. Like my mom would basically make like 2 liters of red salsa every Sunday
Mm-hmm.
for the whole week. And you just have the salsa in the fridge all the time for whatever, for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, whatever. It's always there. Like it's just your basic food prep for the week. That's just a staple you have. And so I try to explain to people like, try it this way. Try a fresh salsa and see what you think, because I don't know that you've ever had something like this, unless it's at a restaurant. And even then, I've found that they are, well, I can get into that later. But the idea, I've often had people come like taste it at a tasting or an event or something and be like, "Oh my God, why does your salsa taste so different?" And I was like, "Because I just made it. That's all. It's just I just made it, and it's just vegetables. That's all there is. There's nothing else in there. There's nothing preserving it except for maybe some salt, and that's it." So, like that kind of educational base was kind of where that whole arm or column of what I'm offering to people is like, look, the salsa is supposed to be fresh. That's the difference. This kind of music is only for the North. People in the South don't listen to this kind of music. That's just a little educational thing for you. Whatever it is, those things led to this whole, branch of what I do. And I've done like some online kind of little classes about everything from making tortillas to making cocktail mixers to, things like that. And a lot of that, again, is just kind of innate knowledge that I've come across that other people don't have. So I figure, why not offer that to people? But what I've found even more so, and this is kind of what added to me pushing on this side, is that while doing these things, I keep finding that people are kind of starving for even more basic knowledge and understanding about food and how to eat and how to make food. Like I keep doing these little, I have done and plan to do more kind of little 30-minute Instagram sessions focused on something really specific. So I did a little 30-minute session on everything that you need to know about onions, because people don't know how to buy onions. People don't know the difference in taste of onions. People don't know, some basic rules about how to find a fresh onion, how to not cry when you're chopping onions. Like those to me are now second nature because I've been cooking my whole life. But I realized when I was doing salsa classes, people were like, "Oh, wait, why don't you use this kind of onion instead?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's because of this." "Oh, how do you not cry while you're chopping onions?" "Oh, well, that's because of this." Like, so there were all these things that grew out of that space. And I was like, oh, I realized again, via experience and time, that I had this knowledge that other people just never came across. And so whenever I do things, I'm like, your grandmother should have taught you this, but you were too busy out on the streets with your friends, not learning how to pick a good onion in the supermarket. So I'm going to teach you how to pick a good onion. So it's like those things only added to kind of the offering because, I just noticed people needed it.
Those are great, because I'm just picturing myself making salsa like a week ago. So I visited a friend. She lives in Bristol, which is like, say, on the west coast of England, and she's Mexican from Southern California. So when I was visiting, because it was a safe time to visit during COVID, but we didn't want to go out a lot anyway. And so she made like these amazing meals. And one of the things she did was she's like, "Well, I'm going to make salsa, because we're going to buy salsa." She goes, "You know what? No, I have an onion at home. Let me make it." And she didn't cry. And the salsa was amazing. And so it inspired me now to every week I make my own, just a pico, pico de gallo style. But I'll cry. And like, if my mom happens to listen to this episode, she'll probably laugh, just because I'm usually on the phone with her, doing my call to her. And I'll be like, oh. And like, I'm just, running around like I'm blinded. I'll usually, I don't know, maybe you can do a video on reminding people not to touch their eye after chili, for example. That's a handy one. But yeah, so that's really cool. So you're able to incorporate the education part in with that. I like your marketing. You have the one button that you made about I'm an American, I speak English, those buttons. And so
in Spanish.
I read your story. Yes, in Spanish. So yeah, like yo soy americano, I think. Yo
hablo inglés.
Hablo español. Hablo inglés. Yeah, I was saying yo hablo español, which is not true. I do not speak Spanish. Yeah, and so when I saw that and hadn't read your article on it, but just saw it, I was just thinking, like, to me, what I saw it as was something like almost an empowering statement, because I feel like what I observe, and I've probably done, if I just want to be really introspective about myself, is you'll see someone and you'll assume they don't speak English.
Right.
And so it's like them saying, yeah, I do. And, I'm surprised that people can even read the button,
Yeah.
honestly. I could, but I took a couple years of Spanish and got in trouble in class and stuff. And so, but for you, what did making that button mean?
So there's actually a longer story behind that, and I'll try to make it fast. So there's a book called When Mexicans Could Play Basketball, and it's a book from the University of Texas Press about a high school in San Antonio, where I'm from, where my best friend's father actually went to high school, and it was a vocational school that they started in San Antonio in the 20s or 30s to give Mexicans a place to go to school because they were still segregated and they didn't want them in the white schools in San Antonio. So, and there were so many Mexicans. So they were like, well, let's
Mm-hmm.
give them a high school and it'll be a vocational school because they're good with their hands and they can get a good job, all of that thinking.
Yeah.
So reading this book is really interesting because this was the first Mexican team that won the state championship in basketball in Texas. And all the trials and tribulations they went through, getting run out of town, getting beaten up, getting chased, like all the bad things that you can imagine in 1940s Texas. But one of the little things that popped up in the storytelling was that there was a rule at the school that you could not speak Spanish on campus, period. Even though everyone that went to school there was Mexican, they were not allowed to speak Spanish. So what they would do was, as the carrot to keep you, wanting to do this, at the end of each week, if you hadn't gotten any demerits for speaking Spanish, you got a ribbon or a pin that
Mm.
said, I'm an American, I speak English. So I thought, what we really should be rewarding is people who are American who can also speak Spanish. And what a great pin
Yeah.
that would be. Like, that's awesome. You do both. That's wonderful. And so I thought it was an interesting flip on what was a pretty tired and terrible thing.
Yeah. No, that's really cool because, and I have a definite political stance, and so I try not to do too much of that on this because that's not what the podcast is about. I'd have to make a different podcast. But I do, one thing I do find fascinating, even being here in England now, is that in the US, I think we've got to be one of the only countries that doesn't really speak more than one language as a population. I mean, other than people from somewhere else. And then the culture does get stripped. I mean, that's an example where people's language being taken from them basically by through punitive means is awful because I want to talk about Tacos Al Pastor actually because I'm half Lebanese and I was fascinated to find out those are from Lebanon. But before that, I will say I wasn't raised by my dad, my biological dad, who was Lebanese, so I don't have any of that culture. And I feel like that's just such a, as I've gotten older, it's a big hole for me, and it's something that's so absent. And I can't imagine if I had learned a language and I wasn't allowed to speak it. I just think that's, I don't know. I don't know if I have a point other than to say I think that's really awful. And even here, a lot of people, they learn French or something. The Brits do, but still, they learn another language. I mean,
for me, the thing that I try to explain it in a non-political way, in a basic understanding of why wouldn't you want to enrich yourself on a basic level? Like, you like to learn things, right? You like to read. It's a wonderful thing. You watched a movie and you learn about something. Like, that's a great thing. Speaking a language is just another one of those amazing tools to be able to take into the world. Like, there's no reason anyone should say, don't learn something. Like, that just seems so backward. Whether or not it's a language or cooking or art or whatever it is, people should learn all the things they can learn. And so the idea that somehow there's a sense that that could be a negative on a basic human level doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And the fact, too, I think comes into play where when English is a second language for people, what I observe is people get embarrassed that they don't speak it well enough or something. And I'm like, you're speaking more than one language. This is your second one. You're actually spelling things better than a lot of American people do. Like, please don't look at it that way. Please look at it as you're showing everybody this amazing respect by speaking their language for them because they can't.
And I also think the other thing too is that it adds two things. It adds a little bit of humility, like you said, but it also adds like at least for me, because this holds for me, not for my girlfriend, but this is just the way it is. And again, she actually speaks English, Spanish, pretty good French. And we've both been learning a
Nice.
bit of Italian because we love going to Italy. We go to Italy every other year. But like, because I have Spanish and English fluently and I can talk through those, when it comes to Italian, I have zero fear. I just throw it out there. I don't care if
Mm.
it's right or wrong. I'm just trying my best to communicate the thing that I need to communicate. And I'm like, look, I already know two other languages. I figure between the two, I can get the right answer in Italian out to you somehow. And that's fine. My aim is communication. My aim is not to be the best Italian speaker speaking flowery, perfect Italian. I don't really care. I just want a beer right now, or I want this kind of sandwich. So, like, for me, it adds that, like, you know, a recklessness of just throw it out there. It's language. It's fine.
Yeah.
It'll get there. As long as you get what you need, you're fine. And I think a lot of people, when it's only one language they understand or know, there's that fear. Like, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? Like, yeah, people say all the wrong things all the time. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I record myself saying the wrong thing all the
Exactly.
time. It's fine.
It's not gonna. It's not gonna.
It's
It's not the
okay.
end of the world. It's fine.
No, nothing's going to happen. So when you look at your company you have now that you're running, I mean, what's been kind of the biggest surprise or biggest learning to you going into food and maybe just going into having a product like this versus a digital product, which you've worked with a lot, right?
Well, the odd thing is more like I'm doing something that's purposefully off. It's a little bit different from what people are used to. It doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
make sense to a lot of people because it's not what they think it is. And I used to say it's kind of a bait and switch, but it's not really that. And like I said before, my business, what I make money on, is totally varied. It's not just one
Mm-hmm.
thing. And again, it's hard for a lot of people to get that through their heads and to understand what that means. And that's been the hardest thing. But that's kind of why I started it the way I did. I explain it now that the salsa is a tangible thing. You can eat that one thing. I can deliver that to you. You can come and have that at a thing, whatever. You can taste that. And my hope, my assumption is that it makes a difference. It will be different from any salsa you've had before, hopefully the best salsa you've had, but it will also be unique in your experience.
Mm-hmm.
That tangible thing is my foot in the door to explain to you a bunch of other things. And I even had this on my LinkedIn for a while. Hopefully, what happens from whatever area, whatever channel you're coming to me from, whatever your business is, whatever your job is, whatever your cultural circle of friends is, after interacting with the salsa or interacting with me or listening to me or reading some of my writing, whatever it is, you come away thinking, Miguel's that Mexican guy. When I need Mexican
Mm-hmm.
things, maybe I'll think of Miguel. And, that
Mm-hmm.
led me to doing, like I said, like I did a Cohen's Fashion Optical needed to do a redesign and a translation of their website. And I happened to have the friend who was running the project on the redesign. And she was like, hey, you speak Spanish, right? I'm like, yeah. She was like, we need somebody to translate the site. Can you do it? You know how, digital online development works. So you know kind of how to deal with that. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And that's the kind of thing that's the hardest for me is that explaining that to people that
Mm-hmm.
you may not ever work with anything that needs Spanish translation, but you may
Mm-hmm.
meet somebody who is like, oh, I had a friend who his friend runs the auctions at Sotheby's. And he was like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
They think that they might be having a Mexican thing coming up in the next few months as one of their big auctions. Could you help? And I'm like, whatever you need. Like if it's just making sure the accent marks are in the right place or just reading to make sure that you don't forget an enye because that turns a word from something normal into something dirty. Like that happens all the time. So it's like little dumb things like that. I'm like, I'd be more than happy to be the Mexican to look over your stuff. Or like music world friends were like, hey, we've got this new streaming thing. We need some playlists to populate the Latin music section. I'm like, okay, because you came to me, I'm not going to give you the answer that everybody else would because you're asking me for a reason, right? And she was like, absolutely. And I was like, how
Mm-hmm.
about I do, a playlist for Texas stuff, a playlist for norteño, mariachi stuff, but I also want to do a playlist of like all the Latin music that has come out of New York because it's
Mm.
so important in terms of Latin music, period, across the board, across genres, like all those things from hip hop to, soul, salsa, whatever. Like all these things are super important. And she was like, absolutely, that's why I asked you to do it. So it's that, like I said, it's a lack of imagination on other people's points, but me having to kind of walk other people, clients, business, whatever, through this idea of things I can do for you are pretty wide ranging. And the good thing for me, and this is the other thing that I tell people, is that one of the reasons I do it that way is because I can sell a jar of salsa for $8, which is very expensive, but it is handmade and it's delicious.
Mm.
Uh, or I can talk to Diageo for a Don Julio project for an hour and make $1,000. So the elasticity of what I can make money
Mm.
on is so wide ranging that I love that. That's great. It's fun. But I can also, do it for free for someone because I want to help them and their business is new or whatever it is. And so, that is at once the boon, but it's also kind of the difficulty is that it's not that easy for a lot of people to get their head around that world.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people just, is an agency just looking to hire somebody who knows, Latinx singers and they can put a list together or just translate this and that's fine. And there's plenty of business. And I've talked to other kind of Hispanic focused agencies or whatever about jobs. And it's happened like 3 or 4 times over the last 5 years. And we always come out of it the same with the agency people being like, you do what we do. You're just one guy. You basically are our company. I'm like, yeah, I am. So they're like, not that we don't want to hire you, but you're already doing it. So that's cool. And so a lot of it is just
Yeah.
kind of explaining to people how that exists or how that can be a possibility. And so when people don't have something really, really tangent and rigid in terms of your business, it requires a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of imagination. Oops, sorry, a lot of imagination and a lot of explanation, and having that kind of patience to
Mm.
explain to people and get them to the to the point that you want them to be. Because again, they don't have to know everything I do, but if I can find a way to explain it, what happens, the other thing that I've found, and it's both good and bad, is that this process, this explanation, and this kind of early business development side of things weeds out the people who aren't patient and don't want those things. And that's cool with me because I don't really want to do those projects anyway. So it helps a lot
Mm-hmm.
in terms of deciding what kind of people to work with. Um, and so, like I said, working freelance for a long time or even to separate from the team, one of the things you find is that you don't want to waste your time. There's a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
wasting to be had, dealing with people. And, after all the freelance stuff I've done and consulting I've done, the other thing I've learned is that the people who are really difficult at the beginning, they're not going to get better. They just never do. It's never like 2 weeks of the project, like, oh, they're awesome now. They're so easy to work with. That first week was really difficult. No, that's never how it is. They only get worse.
It's that saying, right? That people show you who they are.
Absolutely. And people get really
Yeah.
drunk on the idea, like, oh, but they've got so much money. They're going to pay so much. I'm like, nope, not worth it for me.
Yeah, you get to choose who you want to work with, and being to be able to do that and to have the fortitude to say, and I'm doing that. I can choose, and I do.
It's hard.
That's good.
It's not easy. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's not been easy 5 years at all. And it's very uh, feast or famine. You've got to be built for that world. And I mean, I did it for my writing stuff for years. So I kind of already had a feeling for it. But, there is that sense that, you know, nothing comes for 3 months. What are you going to do? Like, how are you dealing with that? And that's why, like I said, there's so many things in my portfolio that I'm trying to offer people that I'm like, well, if I can sell X amount of salsa or I can do a couple of pop-up taco events, then I can guarantee myself X amount of money for the month, and that should pay all the bills. Uh,
Yeah.
it was when COVID happened that all of that was suddenly taken off the board. And I was like, okay, now 80% of what I do that I make money on is gone.
Yeah. Looking at COVID, actually, for you, I mean, have you found you had to innovate with your product or as far as the salsa, or are you just now kind of doing more of your other services, or how's that been
Well, I
going?
mean, it's still the same in terms of searching, basically. So for the first maybe 3 to 5 months. So from March, there was no business. I was about to do a consulting gig like a month and a half before, and they were just like, "Oh yeah, send it to rate. We'll work it out. We'll want to get your timing down, so we want to make sure you're available for when we need a deliverable." I'm like, "All right, cool." And then COVID happened, and I know they shut down, and that just went radio silent for the next 3 months. It's still silent. They've never replied. But so that was kind of the writing on the wall. But at the same time, when that happened, it was like, oh, so all of these tentpole events that I had for the year, which were food events, which were Austin City Limits Backstage, which was the New York Times food event, like I had these big things that happen every year or that have happened the last few years. I was like, okay, so all of those kind of easy, or not even easy, but booked business, 3,000 here, 5,000 there, 1,000 there, like all those things that were just always there were gone. And then the basic kind of pressing the flesh out there tastings, obviously, off the list. So catering events, off the list. So like all of the things that were kind of out of the big toolbox, all of them were gone. Even the consulting side, because again, they all shut down their businesses, or they went into free fall, or they were just scared, so they quit everything. So yeah, I had to kind of, and even the shops that I sell salsa in, they all shut down or were down to skeleton crew or short hours, and just the foot traffic is nothing now. So really all of my bases were kind of ruined. But the good thing was I kind of already been in this position starting up 5 years ago. I had nothing and I was working from scratch. So it's like, okay, I'm back to nothing. That's okay. How do we manage this? Obviously looked for any relief packages, did all that work, talked to people, and it was just kind of little things. It was like, okay, well, I'm going to do a t-shirt drive now, and then I'll do a gift certificate drive later, and little things like that just kind of kept the lights on and kept people paying attention. But also, after those first 4 or 5 months, things started slowly opening up again, so I could kind of push that again, give myself a little bit more marketing time, and develop more regular kind of people to show up to buy the salsa on the regular, things like that. And then because of that change in situation, a lot of the shops I was working with were also looking for new things, right? Like one of my main seller is a bar right near my house. It's at a restaurant. It's not a restaurant. It's a bar, artisanal beers, like 20 on tap, and then they have these big coolers of like every independent brewer in the country, super, super hipster RD beer stuff. But they also have other food things because the stuff in the front is only to go. You can't drink that on premises. You have to take it. So they have a to-go business of beer that's very regular, right? People come in after work every single day and buy a 6-pack of beer from them. That's always something new and interesting, right? So they've got that kind of traffic. With that, they've added cheeses and charcuterie and artisanal jarred foods, whatever, because people want to make a whole dinner out of it or whatever it may be. They have bread delivered every day, blah blah blah. So they've been selling my salsa forever and using it in their like on premises food. But they were like, look, we're kind of screwed right now, right? Like people can't sit inside in the bar. Period. They're just not, and their bar is relatively small, so they have like one giant table in the middle and like 4 chairs on the side. They're like, yeah, that just doesn't work right now. So I said, well, I'm not doing anything and I need the money. So we started doing pop-ups. So I'll do breakfast taco pop-ups on the weekends, and we'll do it in the middle of the day because they basically have 0 foot traffic in the middle of the day, much less at night. So they were like, look, if you can do it, you can do whatever you want here. You can have all the space you want. You can have all the time you want. You can do whatever you want, your style, and we're not even going to take a cut. Whatever you sell is yours. We'll just, any beer sales that we get on top of that, we'll bank that, but we won't even charge you anything. Just do it yourself because, again, they're in a tough spot too. And so those kind of relationships are the ones that are kind of coming through for me and making it worthwhile. And again, I had done a few pop-ups before, but not enough to where it was my business. And now it's been my business for a couple of months. And that may change. I don't know. But it's having, again, the imagination, both on the client or partner side, as well as my own, and being like, well, what can I do, and what do people want that they'll pay for and go walk outside of their house for right now?
Mm-hmm. And is that in Manhattan or in Brooklyn?
East
Manhattan. Okay,
Village.
cool. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll post that just because, we'll post that in the show notes too. And because I have a few friends in New York, I'll tell them, but that's awesome.
And again, it's like, that's where we've been pushed. So we just move, kind of find a way to make it happen.
So yeah, that's another thing I'm just getting from you about just kind of being flexible and agile, not agile in the Scrum way, but agile in the agile way.
Or both. Be agile.
Or both.
Do them both.
Yeah, you can just, have like 2-minute sprints of tacos.
Yeah. I like to waterfall my tacos, actually.
So before we get to my, this fun questions I have, tacos al pastor. So the Lebanese can get credit for those.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, see, 23andMe makes so much more sense now because of what I like to eat and now.
Yeah, I mean, and that little tidbit I love to use because it's so interesting, but it's also one of the things that I use almost like a rule, like a ruler to smack people with, because there is, like I said, or like you said, you read what I wrote and Medium stuff, but I get really tired of this idea of, on both sides, there's people who are like, I only eat American Mexican food. That's my favorite. That's the only kind there is. Or the opposite, which is I only eat real Mexican food. And their definition of real Mexican food can be anything. And so there are things that I like to explain to people, like tacos al pastor, where I'm like, that's not Mexican. Like, it is now, but it didn't start that way. It's been that way because you grew up with it as Mexican food. But that's the only reason, because it didn't come from us. We took that idea. That's basically your Lebanese spit. That's all that is. Like, look at the tortillas. The tortillas do not look like anybody else's tortillas. Why? Because they're basically pita bread. It's basically, bread from the Mediterranean. That's what it was built to be, because you had thicker cuts of meat that you had on a spit. And that was just how it is. Like, it's never, people like to simplify things to make their kind of experience the default, right? Like, I read this great book. It's a short book, but it was about kind of modern masculinity. But one of the most important takeaways from it was the writer was explaining how the most problematic part of masculinity, period, is that the reason it is so toxic is because everybody who expresses their view on masculinity thinks that that is the default, right? So they grow up understanding that boys play sports, girls do makeup. This is my default. Girls wear dresses, boys wear pants. Like, all these default things. While that is just natural in human nature, you're born and learning things, and these are your bases, your foundational understandings. The problem becomes when your default becomes the understanding of the spectrum of the world, and that's the only way you'll look at things. So that world of default of saying, well, I had this food in Mexico, so it's Mexican food. If it's not that, then it's not real, is a bad default to have. And looking at the world, like we said before, like through one language, and that default is the only way it should be, is a bad default to have. Because usually what you'll find is, if you do a little research, that default that you thought was so firm and so foundationally true, tacos al pastor or true Mexican food, isn't so easy. It's not so. It's a little more nuanced than that. There's a little bit more depth there. Yeah. And again, it works the other way. Like, oh no, Mexican food doesn't have cheese all over it. Well, you know what? It sure does. Like, all over Mexico, there's tons of cheese on top of everything. And maybe you're not thinking of it in the same way as a Southern California crispy taco with lettuce, tomato, and cheese on top. But that doesn't mean that Mexican food doesn't have cheese on it. So, those default positions that people come from aren't bad unless they use it as a rule for everyone else. Your defaults are not everybody else's defaults. And so that food thing is where I like to kind of it does almost seem political, but I'm trying to use the food part to make it apolitical, right? To make it understandable, and that there are things in the world that, again, if you look more deeply and you scratch the surface and you get there, it's a nuanced thing. There's more there than you really think there is. So like I said, what
Mm.
people love, like joking and dissing nachos, I'm like, well, I've talked to the grandson of the guy who created nachos, and he was
Oh,
Mexican.
nice.
So I know for a fact that nachos are Mexican food. They were created on the border by this man. His name is Ignacio. That's why they're called nachos, because that's the nickname for people named Ignacio. Like, he was Mexican. He did it in Mexico. Does that not make it Mexican food? Whether or not everyone in the United States eats them way more than anybody in Mexico does, that doesn't mean to me that it's not Mexican food. Same thing, like Caesar salad. Is that Italian? Well, it's actually from a restaurant, bar, hotel called Cesar, and that's where it comes from. It was created by a Mexican.
Oh.
So, is that Mexican food or is it Italian food? Again, scratch the surface. It sure gets really confusing and nuanced.
Nice. Yeah. So that's all. That's cool. And I like the nachos thing too. I was just picturing at Dodger Stadium, and pardon me, anyone offended by the Dodgers at this point, you know. But it was like the plastic tray with like a bowl for salsa,
The
and a
delicious,
bowl for
delicious Rico's cheese.
Yeah.
But again, Rico's
And the
cheese,
tortillas.
invented by a Mexican in Texas,
Yeah.
that became the concession staple. Is that Mexican food? It's pretty close. I mean, no one else created it.
It's
It's
called
very,
nachos.
exactly. It's very nuanced, and so to make those arguments, you watch out. Watch out if you don't know. Maybe that's even a better thing to
That's
take. Of
true.
like, don't speak from a position of power that you may not have.
Yeah, you better be sure,
Do
right?
the
Because you don't
research.
know.
Like the crazy part,
Yeah.
though, another one, much like tacos al pastor, is so a lot of people I've worked with, people I know that are from Mexico City, like they have their go-tos to crap on American Mexican food, right? Some of them love
Mm.
joking about chili con carne or
Oh yeah.
the hard shell taco. Well, my favorite thing with the hard shell taco is it's, again, super nuanced, right? Like the patent. Well, let me go further back. The beginning of the hard shell taco that Americans know is from San Diego. And it was the guy who started Taco Bell,
Oh.
had a burger restaurant down the street from a Mexican food restaurant that had been there for a few decades. And it was like a
Uh-huh.
Mexican family in San Diego that made Mexican food. He was really into franchise stuff, and he had learned from McDonald's that world, and that's why he started a burger place. And then he realized, well, there's already a McDonald's, so why don't I do Mexican food? So I'll try to do what they're doing. I'm going to do their stuff, but I'll do a McDonald's version of it, right? He went to
Mm.
try to patent the idea, like a machine to make shaped fried taco shells as we know them. And what he ended up finding out was that there was a guy in New York City who had already patented it, and he was Mexican.
Oh.
So who's to blame for the hard shell Taco Bell taco? Well, it's not exactly the white guy who started it in San Diego. He had already been beaten to the punch by a Mexican guy in New York City, of all places.
New York City.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Get a rope.
The paste. Exactly. Paste picante sauce. Oh my
But
god.
so I'm like,
You're probably your
yeah,
favorite.
absolutely. It is from San Antonio. But, those kind of things are, again, like, your default may think, oh, American hard shell tacos, disgusting. That's
Mhm.
not Mexican. But if I prove to you that a Mexican person had been doing it and had been doing it so much that they had to patent a machine to do it for them, and then they beat the guy from Taco Bell to that patent, tell me, is that Mexican food?
That's a great origin story, I have to say, because there's all the Marvel stuff. I kind of want to know about the origin of different
Oh,
tortillas.
well,
Like,
I have kicked around a book idea, so let's not get too far down that road. But
okay, no.
but like those the other story that you should look into. I won't tell now. Let's not take up time with all my origin stories and my Marvel Mexican food superheroes. But the guy who invented Fritos
Uh huh.
also invented Cheetos.
What?
And it's this amazing story from Texas.
Oh,
I'm like, imagine this. This is like it's like Dolly Parton writing "I Will Always Love You" and Jolene in the same day. Like this guy did Fritos and then
oh.
he did Cheetos. Like he basically changed the world for snack food. One guy.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna look that up because I mean, I wish he would have invented something to handle Cheetos fingers that you get after
Yeah,
you eat them,
there's
but
just commitment.
that's like Butterfinger teeth are a
Yeah,
thing. I mean, there's all these things that
you just
happen.
have to know you're
Oh
in
man,
and committed to eating the Cheetos with that one hand.
yeah,
And
yeah, that's true. That's true. You have to pick the
yep,
hand because that's not the one you want to
nope.
write with later. Oh man, Miguel, this is great. So, all right. So, do you have any like advice or mantra that you just like to share with people, or that? Yeah, just that's basically the question.
Um, I mean, I don't know if there's any in particular that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, one, I'm a big believer in memento mori, and that in and of itself, remember that you're going to die, is a great way to live. But in terms of kind of business working and stuff, my thing is so much more like don't do what you don't want to do.
Hmm.
Like it's just that simple. Like I said, there's been for me one of the realizations has been the times that I've not been doing what I wanted to, or felt terrible about doing what I was doing, or having that stomach ache every morning, going like, "Oh, I don't want to go to work. I really don't want to go to work and do this work." The only thing stopping you from not doing that is you. Like, you could
Yeah.
probably make do. Yeah, and it's not that big of a deal. What no one is forcing you to do those things, and it's just your fear or money or whatever it is. But all those things can be overcome, or not even overcome. You just deal with it. Like you know, I find after doing this for a while now, I found that there were all these kind of fake, or not fake, but just kind of facile goals that I had laid for myself, or that that I
Hmm.
thought were important, and creature comforts that I suddenly expected every day that I thought were necessary, and not having those after a while made me realize kind of the worth of those things a lot more, rather than want them more, made me realize there was no point in wanting those. And so
Hmm.
um I mean, I guess this is kind of goes hand in hand with that. Like my pinned tweet on my personal account is James Vanderbeek from Varsity Blues telling his father,
Uh-huh.
"I don't want your life."
Yeah.
And that's just it. Like I talk to my friends and I'm like, that's great. I love that you have kids and you have a house and you have a car and you've done your job for 15 years and you're happy doing that. That's great. I don't want any of that. Like I watch things, I'm like, I don't want a car. I don't want a giant house. What would I do with a giant house? Why would I need that? I've lived in New York in a tiny apartment for 20 years. I don't know what I would do with 800 square feet. That idea is like, but it's like, and like I said, it suddenly became all these creature comforts that I had. It was like, I actually don't need to buy clothes ever again because of those 10 years that I worked and got paid really well. And I bought all the suits I'm ever going to need. I bought all the shoes I'm ever going to need. Like, I couldn't
Hmm.
physically go through like all the clothes that I've bought. And I was like, oh, that's not a bad thing. Like, I did it. I enjoyed it. It was when I could afford it. But now, like, I don't really need to go shopping for things like that. Like, I don't need a new blank. Like, I don't need a new iPhone. I've got the one I've got. It works. Whenever I need to finally move, I will. But, and so it becomes those kind of things where like, there's the keeping up with the Joneses thing that's so,
Hmm.
and for a while I thought it was a New York thing. And then whenever I go and see people in other cities and talk to my friends in other places, I'm like, no, you just have different keeping up with the Joneses things. And that's fine.
Suburbs,
Yeah.
like a up or a middle class suburb. It's in the line to pick up kids.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah, I
military
mean that's where you
industrial
see it.
complex level of keeping up with the Joneses.
Hmm.
And I'm like, again, like I have friends that change houses like every 2 or 3 years. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that can't be comfortable even. Like the one thing I hate more in the world ever than anything ever is moving. Moving
Yes.
is terrible. It's the worst thing ever. But people do it every 2 years because they're like, that's what we do. Like we buy a house, we work on it, we fix it a little bit, whatever, and then we move and we find a new house, a
Yeah.
newer house, a bigger house, whatever. And that was another thing. And I guess it's kind of worked in that same world. I was dealing with a gaming company. They were all really cool people. And at one point I had to deal with uh, their finance guy, their budget guy. And we were just, doing small talk. And he lived in New Jersey. It's a youngish guy, like maybe late 20s, early 30s, but he had a wife, and I think they had a kid coming. And so he was like, "Oh yeah, I've got to go to the bank after this." And I was like, "Oh, is it house stuff?" He's like, "Yeah, we got to get the mortgage all figured out and whatnot." And I showed me this binder, like a giant binder. And he was like, "This is all the research I've done, like all the information I have on every house, all the money situations on our side, what projections." Like he had done his homework, right? I was like, "Wow, that's
Wow.
amazing that you can do that and know how to do that." He's like, "Yeah, I'm not. It's my first time, but I'm going to get it right." So I'm still working with these guys like a year and a half later. And maybe 6 months, 8 months later, I'm like, "Hey, how did that stuff go with your house? And did you move?" And he was like, "Yeah, we moved, whatever." But he said, "I had a really weird experience with it." And I was like, "What is that?" He said, "When I was dealing with the loan people, I had all the numbers. I had all the projections. I
Mm-hmm.
had the taxes. I had everything written down. I had done my research. And the loan guy, the mortgage officer, whatever, was saying, okay, that makes sense. I see all the numbers. All of this makes sense. But what you should do is you should pay for, because you can afford it, just throw in, maybe go a little bit higher, go another 200,000 higher and get a bigger house." And the guy was
Oh,
like, "Well, why would I do that? Look at the numbers. I have this exactly to what I can afford, what I want to afford, percentages, everything down for X amount of years." And the guy said, "Well, here's the thing: you're going to want to move in a year or two, right? So if you get a more expensive one now, then when you sell that, you'll get a more expensive one next time, and then again, you pay another over 200, 300, and then when you move from that house, you'll get another over 300. And you just keep going and just keep pushing." And he's like, "But this is what I can afford, and this is what I want to pay for, and this is the size I want." And the guy was like, "Well, no, but you're going to want to upgrade every time, and you're going to want to sell for more. Just go ahead and overextend yourself, 2 or 300,000 for each time you move, and you'll be in a better position." And he's like, "But I have the
oh,
numbers right here. I can't afford another $300,000." And he was like, "It
crazy.
amazed me that somebody who is in the business of finance, who's in the business of numbers, in the business of paying for things and not getting people to overextend themselves, was telling me, a person who had done all the homework and done all of the math and really, really like focused on this, to overextend and to do something that I didn't want to do." And he was like, "But I could tell that this is what everybody does. This is
Mm-hmm.
what this man was used to doing and what everybody that came through his office did." And he had kind of the wherewithal, just because of the math, where he was like, I would never do that. That doesn't make any sense." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's kind of what we should do in life. Like, there's no point. Just look ahead, pay
Right.
attention, and just, you don't need that. You probably don't want that. It's just kind of something to keep your attention for the time being."
Yeah. Well, and COVID's kind of, for me, I mean, I haven't had to get dressed that much,
Absolutely.
like, I
Like, I
mean,
made
in
a
regular
joke. I was like,
clothes
I did
and
laundry and I only washed like 6 pair of socks, and I hadn't
yeah,
washed clothes in like 3 months. And I was like, because I don't
I'm
go
washing like
anywhere.
so much. Yeah. It's like so much Lycra because I ride my bike.
Yeah.
So it's like I look way more athletic than I am based on my laundry, right?
That's what it was for a while too. I was like, oh, I only have workout clothes. That's all I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, cool. Thank you. I think that's good. And I think people get a lot out of that. So this is the fun five. So these are my last
All right.
questions. So, what's the oldest T-shirt you have and still wear? And this is kind of inspired by my wardrobe because I'm always wearing concert T-shirts.
As am I. So I know this one. This is an easy one, actually, for me. And this, I'm only counting stuff that I've owned the whole time. I'm not counting vintage things that I've randomly picked up
Okay.
along the way. I have a Happy Mondays T-shirt from the Pills, Thrills, and Bellyaches era that I bought in 1989,
Oh,
and I still
amazing.
wear it, and it's still in pretty good condition, surprisingly. But yeah, that's definitely the oldest one I have. I've got some. Well, I've got
Awesome.
some like from. I actually have to amend that now that I think about it, because I have some, maybe some kind of. Oh no, that one came before. Those probably came like 89, 90. But yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna stick with the Happy Mondays then. There's some other ones, but they're probably a little bit younger.
Younger. All right. Cool. So one thing people are saying about 2020 is like every day's Groundhog's Day, right? It's just so if you had to pick a song, so in the movie, it's I Got You,
Mhm.
Babe. If you had to pick a song to wake up every morning to at your from your alarm, what would it be?
Well, this is probably very hard to wake up to, or it would make a jolt for waking up. But I usually use this answer for if you had to only hear one song over and over again for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Which is yeah.
Uh, it's Motorhead, Ace of Spades.
Okay.
It's just the perfect song,
Cool.
and it's just long enough. It's just perfect. But that's an
Good.
intense way to
Okay.
wake up.
It will be. But at least she'll be up.
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of waking up, coffee or tea or neither?
Coffee.
Coffee. All
I think
right.
that's
And how do you take your coffee?
uh, black. I usually my if I like the platonic ideal for me is Italian coffee, but Americano style, lungo. So
Mhm.
extra tall, but Italian level espresso level of intensity.
Goes well with your
Yes, exactly,
song then.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
In
It's
case that
a
didn't
crazy
work.
morning over here.
Yeah, you're ready. You're ready to go. He's fired up. Okay. When was the last time you like laughed so hard you cried or just couldn't stop laughing? Like you just had this immense joy of I think joy is expressed in laughing, so we'll go with that.
So I've been doing this thing recently. Well, I guess not recently, all year, uh, where I told myself once we were going into lockdown, I was like, you know what? I feel like death is at the door, and I'm not existentially worried about it, but it's a thing, right? I
Mhm.
thought, you know what? I don't want to watch new movies and watch new TV shows that I don't know that might suck and waste my time on them. So I'm only going to watch movies that I know that I like already. And so I've been doing this thing, hashtag quarantine comfort classics, and
Mhm.
only watching movies I know I like. And I watch like probably 8 to 10 movies a week, if not more. Um, and while doing that, I've come across all these movies that I loved, and they still make me laugh in like incessantly. And so
Mhm.
maybe a month ago rewatched Blazing Saddles, and I love Blazing Saddles, one of my
Oh,
favorite movies of all time, hands down. And so I watch it all the time anyway, so it's not even like it's weird. But every time I watch that movie, there are parts that just floor me still. Like one of them is like, if my girlfriend and I would just say it to each other out of nowhere, just say, somebody's got to go back and get a shitload of dimes. Those lines still get me. Still get me.
it's no, that's great. I started watching Frasier again.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite show, and just kind of a nerd. And I probably had a weird crush on Kelsey Grammer in high school. Now that everyone knows about now, thanks to this. But yeah, like some of the lines in there or some of the faces, I
Yeah.
die. So I totally relate, and yeah, it's great. So all right, and the last one, who inspires you right now?
So I've got a good answer for this, and this will be especially good for you being in London. Fergus Henderson, the guy who runs St. John.
Oh, okay.
One, so he had a terrible car accident. So he had some, like his skull was crushed, and he's got these like kind of terrible scarring things. But he kind of took that moment and decided to do whatever he wanted food wise. And it wasn't the
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing that was trendy at the time when he started doing it. And he's a nose to tail guy. So he's all about kind of, awful and all those things, which I love. But
Mm-hmm.
what I really like about him, what I really find inspiring, besides all the food stuff, that's kind of just icing, but is that he took this terrible accident, had a memento mori moment of like, I could have died. I want to do what I want to do with my life now. But he takes that to a level that I am so inspired by. Like a good example in the book, there's a, a lemon caraway seed cake that he calls
Mm-hmm.
his elevenses cake. And the idea of
Okay.
elevenses is one of my favorite things in the world because if you're not drinking at 11 a.m., then you're probably wasting your life because you should be able to have at least one glass of sherry at 11 a.m. just to keep that day going. Um, but that idea is kind of central to living his life now.
Mm,
It's like
yeah.
it's like if you look at Winston Churchill's um, drinking for the day, It's totally worth looking up because it's hilarious and awesome. But it's like, imagine being Winston Churchill and having the weight of the world on your shoulders and like all these people that you're sending to death, like just a terrible like responsibility. And he decided with that, he was going to enjoy every single day. So if you look at the list of the things that he drank throughout the day and when he drank, like that world of what, no matter what, his regimented world of diplomacy still had to focus on how much he ate and drank every day because that was a kind of a pure innocent happiness for him. I love that idea. Like, that's great. Like, and it may not be food for everybody, but if you find those things that make you kind of ecstatic for the day or for the moment and that they keep you going, then do that. And that you could take that from either a car accident or just age or whatever. Another kind of undercutting of that is somebody asked Steve Martin why he moved to Los Angeles. And his answer was the weather and every meal. And I was like, that's a good way to live your life. If that's the kind of, like, I kind of agree, but I still live in New York, which is terrible weather. But like that idea that he made those choices and that those two things are the things that make him happy every day. Like, just focus on those two things. Find that joy, wherever that comes from, and make it that. So if it's having a sherry and cake at 11 a.m. every single day, that's great. If it's having, 2 bottles of Paul Roger champagne at dinner and then finishing it with, an Amaro and then finishing that with a scotch, like, hey, whatever that may be, you do your thing, man. You're Winston Churchill. No one can tell you that you're wrong. So kind of that lifestyle, that view on life really more than anything else is super inspiring. And that's kind of like get the noise out of your life and just find those little things and you'll be all right.
Nice. Well, thanks so much. So is there anything you want, if someone is at the end of this and wants to look you up, and I'll have links in show notes, but is there any specific thing you want them to look up or see?
I mean, for me, it's everything kind of pivots around my Instagram. So at Salsa Pistolero, SalsaPistolero. Everything kind of focuses there, and then it shoots off to Medium or Twitter or wherever. But yeah, that's the easiest place to find me. And I always tell people I'm very easy to find on the internet. You put my name in or put in Salsa. There's only one of me or very few of me. That's pretty easy.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Miguel. It was great chatting with you. Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me this week. You can find out more about our guest in the show notes. The music you're probably moving to by now is by Joe Mafia. Find him on Spotify. That's Joe, Maffia. And Rob Metke is responsible for our visual design. You can find him online by searching for Rob, Metke. Thanks, Rob. Let us know who you'd like to hear from or about your own experiences defining yourself outside of work at More Than Work Pod on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Give us a follow. Or visit our website at rabiasaid.com. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to More Than Work. We'll be back next week with another guest. In the meantime, while being kind to others, don't forget to be kind to yourself.